January 27th, 1944. Anzio Beachhead, Italy. The sky above the blood-soaked sand was a churning mass of steel and fire. Lieutenant Charles B. Hall banked his battered P-40 Warhawk hard left, feeling the airframe shudder under the strain. Below him, Allied soldiers were dying by the hundreds as German Focke-Wulf 190s tore through their positions with impunity. Hall's plane was obsolete, outgunned, and according to every official report filed by his commanding officer, piloted by a man biologically incapable of the intelligence required for aerial combat. He squeezed the trigger anyway. The .50 caliber rounds found their mark, and the Focke-Wulf disintegrated in a ball of orange flame. It was Hall's second kill of the day. By sunset, his squadron, the unit deemed too timid, too mentally inferior for frontline combat, would shoot down 12 German fighters in 48 hours. The men who flew those missions weren't supposed to be there. They weren't supposed to exist. 18 years earlier, the United States Army War College had published a document declaring with scientific certainty that black men lacked the mental capacity for technical warfare, the courage for combat, and the character for command. That report became the bedrock of military segregation, a wall built on pseudoscience and maintained by prejudice. But on that January day over Anzio, as Hall's wingmen racked up kill after kill, something became undeniable. The wall was cracking, and the men with red tails on their fighters were the ones swinging the hammer. The path to that moment began not with aviation, but with political pressure that the Roosevelt administration could no longer ignore. By 1940, civil rights leaders were hammering Washington with an uncomfortable truth. How could America claim to defend democracy in Europe while denying it to 13 million of its own citizens? Before we climb into that cockpit, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these untold stories of courage. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We want to hear from you. The hypocrisy was deafening. The War Department, forced into action, announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron in 1941. It would be an all-black flying unit. But they didn't call it progress. They called it the Tuskegee Experiment. That single word experiment revealed everything. This wasn't an opportunity. It was a test designed with the expectation of failure. The men selected for this experiment were sent to a hastily constructed airfield in Tuskegee, Alabama, deep in the segregated South. The facilities were substandard, the equipment second-hand, and the white officers overseeing the program largely believed the conclusions of that 1925 report. Every aspect of the training was designed to expose what they assumed would be inevitable inadequacy. The architects of this scheme made one catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed that pressure breaks all men equally. They didn't understand that sometimes pressure creates something unbreakable. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. understood the stakes before he ever climbed into a cockpit. The son of America's first black general, Davis had survived 4 years at West Point, where no white cadet spoke to him outside of official duties. 4 years of silence, 4 years of isolation designed to break his spirit. It didn't work. He graduated with distinction and carried that same iron discipline to Tuskegee. When he looked at the cadets under his command, he saw men carrying the weight of an entire race on their shoulders. One failure, one mistake, one crash could be used to justify shutting down the entire program. So they trained like their lives depended on perfection, because they did. The training regimen at Tuskegee was deliberately brutal. While white cadets at other facilities logged around 200 hours to earn their wings, the Tuskegee pilots flew 300. The washout rate was 60%, compared to 40% in white programs. The base commander, Colonel Noel Parrish, demanded a level of precision that bordered on the inhuman. He wasn't creating pilots. He was forging a weapon sharp enough to cut through decades of institutional racism. Every maneuver had to be flawless. Every landing had to be textbook. Every decision had to be beyond reproach. The cadets who emerged from that crucible weren't just trained. They were over-prepared for a war that hadn't yet seen what they could do. In April 1943, the 99th Pursuit Squadron shipped out to North Africa. They arrived in Tunisia with their heads high and their skills honed to a razor's edge. They were attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William Mamier, a man who viewed the entire Tuskegee program as a waste of military resources. He didn't hide his contempt. He issued them worn-out P-40 Warhawks tough planes, but hopelessly outclassed by the German Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s that dominated the European theater. Then he assigned them to coastal patrol duty. Routine sweeps over empty Mediterranean waters. Milk runs far from actual combat. It was a deliberate strategy to ensure they never got the chance to prove themselves. For weeks, the men of the 99th flew pointless missions over empty seas. Morale began to sink. They had trained harder than anyone, sacrificed more than anyone, and now they were being treated like children who couldn't be trusted with real responsibility. But on July 2, 1943, while escorting B-25 bombers on a raid against a German airfield in Sicily, First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall saw two Focke-Wulf 190s diving toward the formation. This was the moment. Hall broke formation and threw his P-40 into a tight turn, cutting inside the German fighter's attack path. He squeezed the trigger. Tracers stitched across the enemy's fuselage. The Focke-Wulf shuddered, rolled, and plummeted straight into the Sicilian hillside. When Hall landed back at base, the news spread like wildfire. The black ground crews, mechanics, and armorers who endured the same daily degradation as the pilots lifted him onto their shoulders and paraded him around the airfield. That afternoon, a single swastika was painted on Hall's Warhawk. It was the first of what would eventually become 112. The first crack had appeared in the wall, but one victory wasn't enough to silence the doubters. In fact, it barely registered. Colonel Mamier continued filing negative reports, culminating in a devastating assessment sent up the chain of command. He claimed the 99th lacked aggression, that they were timid in combat. He officially recommended they be removed from frontline duty permanently. The experiment, in his view, had failed. The report landed on the desk of General Henry Hop Arnold, commander of the entire Army Air Forces. The Tuskegee program was now on the brink of extinction. All the training, all the sacrifice, Charles Hall's kill, all of it was about to be erased by the stroke of a pen. Then fate intervened in the form of a desperate battle on a blood-soaked Italian beach. In January 1944, Allied forces at Anzio were clinging to a narrow beachhead, while the Luftwaffe threw everything at them in relentless waves. On January 27th, every available fighter was scrambled. 15 Tuskegee pilots in their obsolete P-40s flew into a sky swarming with superior German aircraft. They were outnumbered and outgunned. According to Mamier's report, they should have broken and run. They didn't. They tore into the German formations with a ferocity that stunned everyone watching. Over 2 days above those beaches, the men Mamier had called timid shot down 12 German fighters. Charles Hall got 2 more, bringing his personal total to 3. Captain Lemuel Custis added another. Pilot after pilot registered kills. In 48 hours, they destroyed more enemy aircraft than in their entire previous 7 months of combat combined. The performance was so spectacular, so completely at odds with Mamier's assessment, that it couldn't be ignored. The War Department launched a statistical study comparing the 99th's record with other P-40 squadrons in the theater. The conclusion was undeniable. When factored for equipment and mission types, the 99th was performing as well or better than their white counterparts. Anzio had saved them. They had proven they could fight. Now they were about to prove they could protect. In May 1944, the 99th was combined with 3 other Tuskegee-trained squadrons, the 100th, 301st, and 302nd, to form the 332nd Fighter Group. They were transferred to the 15th Air Force in Italy and given a new mission, long-range bomber escort. This was the most dangerous job in the European theater. Their task was to fly hundreds of miles into the heart of Nazi Germany, shepherding vast formations of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 liberators through flak-filled skies and swarms of enemy fighters. It was a job where glory came second to discipline, where personal kills mattered less than the bomber crews you brought home alive. Colonel Benjamin Davis gathered his men at their new base at Ramitelli and laid down an ironclad rule that would define their legacy. Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home. We stick with the bombers no matter what. This was a radical doctrine. Most American fighter groups operated on aggressive principles, encouraging pilots to break formation and hunt enemy fighters for personal glory. Davis demanded something different. He knew their true measure wouldn't be the swastikas painted on their planes, but the number of bomber crews who made it home to see their families again. Around this time, the 15th Air Force issued an order for all fighter groups to paint distinctive markings on their aircraft for easy identification in the chaos of battle. The 332nd was assigned red. They didn't just paint a stripe. They went all in. The entire tail section of their brand-new P-51 Mustangs was painted brilliant crimson, along with red propeller spinners and red nose bands. They became an unmistakable flash of color against the gray European sky. The legend of the red tails was born. At first, the white bomber crews didn't know who their new escorts were. They didn't know they were black. All they knew was that something was different. These red-tailed fighters didn't dart off chasing German planes at the first opportunity. They stayed close, weaving a protective shield around the vulnerable bombers. If a B-17 took damage and fell out of formation, becoming a sitting duck, a pair of red tails would peel off and stick with it, fighting off attackers all the way home. Word spread like gospel through the bomber bases in Italy. Crews started calling them the Red Tail Angels. In briefing rooms, the question became, who's our escort today? If the answer was the 332nd, a wave of relief washed over the room. Bomber groups began specifically requesting the Red Tails for the toughest missions. The men deemed unfit for combat had become the most sought-after protectors in the sky. Their discipline, born in the harsh crucible of Tuskegee and forged by Davis's unwavering command, was paying the ultimate dividend, saving American lives. They were losing fewer bombers to enemy fighters than any other escort group in the 15th Air Force. The final statistics would be staggering. On average, other P-51 groups lost 46 bombers under their watch. The Red Tails lost only 27. But their greatest test, the mission that would cement their place in aviation history, was still ahead. By March 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former strength. But Germany had one last terrifying card to play. The Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. The Me-262 was a technological nightmare. With a top speed exceeding 540 miles per hour, it was 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51 Mustang. It was a silver shark that could appear, strike, and vanish before a propeller-driven pilot even registered the threat. Fighting it seemed impossible. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd was given the most challenging assignment of their career, escorting B-17s on a 1,600-mile round trip to Berlin to bomb the Daimler-Benz tank factory. It was the longest mission they'd ever flown, taking them deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. Intelligence warned them the target was defended by Jagdverband 7, an elite unit equipped with the fearsome Me-262 jets. Colonel Davis led the mission himself. As 43 Mustangs approached Berlin, the jets appeared. It was the largest formation of German jets ever assembled for a single battle. They sliced through the sky, their turbine engines screaming like banshees. But the red tails were ready. They had studied the jet's weaknesses. It was faster, but it couldn't turn as sharply as the Mustang, and its acceleration from slow speeds was poor. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown remembered their strategy. We knew the German jets were faster. Instead of going directly after them, we went away from them and then turned into their blind spots. It was brilliant tactical adaptation. As a jet swooped in, Brown and his wingmen turned not toward it, but away, forcing the German pilot to overshoot. Then, as the jet blasted past, they whipped their Mustangs around and got on its tail. Brown opened fire. I pulled up at him in a 15-degree climb and fired 3 long bursts, his combat report stated. Almost immediately, the pilot bailed out, 1 jet down. That same day, Lieutenant Earl Lane scored a miraculous deflection shot, hitting an Me-262 from over half a mile away. Lieutenant Charles Brantley bagged a 3rd. In a single afternoon, the Red Tails had shot down 3 of Hitler's superweapons. To put that in perspective, that was more jets than most American fighter groups would destroy in the entire war. For this achievement, the 332nd Fighter Group was awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation, one of the military's highest honors. They had faced the future of aerial combat and defeated it with courage, skill, and the discipline that had been forged in the fires of prejudice. Not every pilot's war ended in victory. 32 Tuskegee Airmen were shot down and became prisoners of war, and their experiences revealed bitter ironies that cut deeper than any flak. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson's P-51 was hit over southern France in August 1944. When he was captured and taken for interrogation, he was shocked by what the German officer knew. The interrogator had information about Ramitelli Airfield, about our squadron commanders, even details about my parents' home in Detroit, Jefferson recalled. He knew my father was a teacher and my mother's maiden name. Their intelligence was frighteningly thorough. The Germans knew exactly who he was. They knew all about the experiment. Jefferson was sent to Stalag Luft III, the infamous prison camp featured in The Great Escape. It was there that the full absurdity of his situation crystallized. Inside a Nazi POW camp, he found a level of integration he had never known in America. The white American prisoners, many of them bomber crewmen whose lives had been saved by red-tail escorts, treated him as an equal. They would shake his hand and thank him for the protection that had kept them alive. Here I was, Jefferson said, in a Nazi POW camp, being treated more equally by white Americans than I would be back home. When the war ended and Jefferson was liberated, the first thing that happened when he stepped back onto American soil was that he was segregated from the white soldiers. He had fought and nearly died for his country, been honored as an equal in a German prison, only to return to the same demeaning prejudice he had left behind. When the final accounting was done, the numbers formed an irrefutable repudiation of every lie that had been told about them. Over 15,000 individual sorties, 178 combat missions, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air. Another 150 destroyed on the ground. They had even sunk a German destroyer with machine gun fire. 96 pilots earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. Their bomber protection record was second to none in the entire European theater. But their greatest victory wasn't measured in statistics. It was measured in the change they forced upon a reluctant nation. Their performance provided undeniable proof that the color of a pilot's skin had nothing to do with his ability to fly, fight, and lead. Their combat record became a powerful weapon wielded by civil rights activists after the war. It was a major factor in President Harry Truman's decision in 1948 to sign Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the United States Armed Forces. The men who had begun as an experiment had become architects of revolution. Recognition came slowly, almost criminally so. For decades, their story was largely forgotten by mainstream America. It wasn't until 2007 that the Tuskegee Airmen were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian honor. By then, only 300 of the original pilots were still alive to receive it, but their legacy was already written. It was written in the contrails over Berlin. It was written in the grateful memories of thousands of bomber crewmen they brought home safely. It was written in the fabric of an American military and society they helped change forever. As Roscoe Brown, the man who shot down a jet over Berlin, put it, "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and we won all three battles. They were set up to fail, expected to fail, dismissed before they ever took off." The German pilots who encountered them in the early days may have laughed, secure in the propaganda that told them these men were inferior. But the laughter died somewhere over the Mediterranean, over Anzio, over the burning ruins of Berlin. It died when the kill count passed 10, then 50, then 100. It died when bomber crews stopped asking if they would survive the mission and started asking if the red tails would be there. In the end, they did the one thing their doubters never thought possible. They soared.